embarked on this planning document, a complete comprehensive service analysis that we've dubbed the Next Gen Transit Plan. We haven't done anything of this caliber ever in our history. It's encompassing Franklin and Grand Isle counties, Chittenden County, and Lamoille and Washington counties as well, where we have services. We're looking at all our routes, where they go, when they go, what days of service, do they go in a certain area that doesn't need service as much as other places? Are we missing some places with service? Really an all-encompassing analysis. We're also looking at fare structures across our region and across our services. We have hired Nelson Nygaard, our national transit consultant, out of Boston. They've got offices in San Francisco and some other places as well. This is Jeff Slater. He's the principal consultant on this project. Tonight we will be talking about Franklin and Grand Isle scenarios, services. We're glad that you're here. Hopefully you've got some recommendations or ideas, or can just concur with what we've covered thus far. Nelson Nygaard did an analysis of all our routes and then came up with some scenarios to help us improve those routes. I think that covers a pretty basic introduction. We don't think we have the room till 6, so certainly feel free to stay after and chat or ask questions along the way. Anything? That's good.
That's good.
All right.
Are you going to drive?
Yeah.
Well, as David said, I am Jeff Slater from Nelson Nygaard, and said we're from Boston. I'm out of our Boston office, but I actually live in Mad River Valley, so I'm here much more than I'm in Boston. So it's got to be a little farther north than I usually get, but not that much. So what we're going to do quickly, if I can get David to switch ahead here, just give you a little bit of background about the study and what we're trying to accomplish, and then talk about some of the specific changes that we're looking at up here. So we have 4 project goals, and they're really group them in themes: enhance, connect, thrive, sustain. The first one, enhance, is really make service more convenient. Places where there is demand, enhance the service where it can be used the most. Connect people to life's activities, and really everything. A lot of whether it's work, shopping, to go to school, to go to a bar, to visit your friends, really want to make it so transit can be useful for a lot more things. So we're not focusing on one trip purpose. Work trips are very important. Trips to meet social service needs are very important, but those aren't the only things. We're trying to really broaden the appeal of transit so people can use it for more purposes. Thrive, improve the region's quality of life. Transit can be very important in helping people live better lives. Things like help people age in place. If there's transit, they can do that. In places in more urbanized areas, and for Green Mountain Transit, especially in Burlington, transit can let people, students, young people especially, who are more oriented that way, get by without a car. And you hear about how a lot of young people are leaving Vermont to go to big cities, and one reason for that is because they can go to cities like New York or Boston where they can get along without a car. There's a potential to be able to provide those types of opportunities in Burlington, but again, really make this a more attractive area, whether it's Burlington, whether it's St. Albans, whether it's Montpelier, or GMT has a very big area, so we're looking at all of it. And then provide services in a financially and environmental sustainable manner. If we get more people on transit, that has a lot of benefits for the environment. It's also important for us to be able to do that in a manner that GMT can afford to operate, which for any transit system is a big problem. It's also it's good for the environment and financially sustainable. If we can fill up buses, or not even just fill them up, but have a number of people on them. If it's a one big bus with one person, that's also good for the environment or for GMT's finances. So that's also a consideration. And just a quick overview of the study. we started out the study by talking to stakeholders throughout the Green Mountain Transit Service area. Pretty wide variety of stakeholders representing what we hoped, what we know was a large number of viewpoints, but hopefully we did get a representation of all the different viewpoints. At the same time we were doing that, we were analyzing customer markets. We do what's called a market analysis to look at what the underlying demand for transit is. Really answer the question, if you build it, how many people will come? So we want to focus service where it will be used, and to the chagrin of many, I would say, not provide service or much service in places where there's very little demand. But as I say that, I'll acknowledge that there is a significant desire among many to provide geographical coverage to as many places as possible, irrespective of what the underlying demand is. But we did look at that, so we did determine where the demand is, where it's higher, where it's lower, where it's very low. We also did an evaluation of existing services. So Green Mountain Transit has over 40 routes. We looked at them in detail. We looked at how they operate, what markets they're intended to serve, how many people are riding them, how many people are riding them by trip, how many people are on each trip, where they're boarding, where they're alighting. In Burlington, we had alighting information in the rural areas, including the Franklin services. We only had boarding information. We can make some assumptions that alightings mirror that, which usually they do, but actually looking at where people are riding to and from and how many people are riding to and from those places. And so then we looked at really how the performance of the existing services matched up to what the underlying demands were. And identify what worked well, and we certainly don't want to screw that up. And things that don't work well, then to look at why it doesn't work well and what changes we can make to improve that. So we went from there into developing scenarios, because really there's never just one way to do things. It's really, you can put things together in different places, in different ways, to accomplish similar things. And oftentimes, also, if you make a change to one route, it's going to necessitate a change to another route. So that's why we look at things in scenarios. It's hard to look at things like a route by route change and look at changes in isolation. And that brings us to now, which is really evaluating those scenarios. And there's a number of things that go into that. First is stakeholder input, which is one of the reasons we're here tonight, is to get your views on the different things we're looking at to improve service. We're also doing a technical evaluation, so we're looking at what these changes cost, also looking at what the projected ridership impacts of these changes would be, as well as some other characteristics. And then that will bring us to the end in early 2018 to produce recommendations. And those recommendations, we'll develop those really based on a combination of the technical analysis, what would work best in terms of ridership, what GMT can afford, and then the stakeholder input that we've received to try to put together a match of things that will really work well, that the public and other stakeholders will support. So that's the process. You can see we are closing into the end. So it's really early 2018 that we'll put it all together and develop the recommendations. And so some of the things through that process, things that we are focusing on is a much stronger focus on general public transportation. And again, that's the transportation that serves a very wide variety of needs rather than focusing in on just one or two types of service. So really trying to broaden the overall appeal of transit, make it more consistent, develop easier to understand regular schedules, to make routes less confusing and inconvenient. One of the things that is a characteristic of the existing service is it's very, I guess you could say, customized. If someone said, hey, can you have the route go 2 blocks away to get me closer to home so I don't have to walk, chances were good Green Mountain Transit would say yes. And then your neighbor called, or not necessarily your neighbor, but someone else calls and says, well, will you make the other trip go over here? So different trips are doing different things at different times of the day. So it makes it confusing. It means that if you're in a bus, it may go somewhere you won't expect. And what we found, or what we know really, is that the more predictable and consistent and understandable service is, the more people will use it. If you can figure it out, you'll use it. If you look at a schedule and the buses are doing all kinds of different things, many people will just say, well, I'm not going to figure that out, I'm just going to drive, or I'm going to get a ride with my friend or something else. So one of the ways to do that is to minimize off-route detours and very low ridership deviations. And so that example of where someone calls up and says, can you have the bus go 2 blocks away to take me right to my house? That may serve one person, but it's taking everybody else on the bus out of their way, and it makes it inconvenient. And so it's better to have that person walk 2 blocks to the bus than take the bus 2 blocks to them. So a lot of this is to really say, is there really a market here? Can we make things straighter, faster, more convenient? Another thing is that a lot of the routes have, especially in the rural areas, have a lot of request stops. And the request stops are, you can ask the driver, if you're on the bus, you can say to the driver, I want to go up to 3/4 of a mile off the route this way, and the route will take you there. On the way back, you have to call and make a reservation because the driver doesn't know where you are, that you want to ride. You have to make those reservations ahead of time. And so that's something else that makes the service unpredictable for most riders. And most of the people who are making those requests are people who can't walk the 2 blocks or 1/4 of a mile, or certainly not 3/4 of a mile, and do have special needs and qualify for paratransit service. So a lot of what we're looking at here is to say the fixed route services are going to stay on their route, and that route will be more predictable. If you do have those special needs, we'll expand paratransit, so we'll cover you that way. So one of the issues right now, Green Mountain Transit, I would say, is trying to do too much with too little in terms of those fixed routes. They're trying to make them fixed route service, they're trying to make them paratransit service, they're trying to make them flexible service, and the service gets watered down, so it's not really doing any of those really well. So this is looking at, let's make the fixed route service better, and for the people who do have special needs, let's have real paratransit service to serve those needs, and no longer try to do everything with one service. And then also improve existing express services. Express really means expressing commuters, so the Alfred and Richford commuters would fall into that. They're not technically express, but fall into that category. And then finally, better match levels of service with demand. So looking at what the demand is, in some cases there should be more service, in some cases there should be less service. So we have to balance these things and make a number of trade-offs. And okay, I'm still getting ahead of myself. And I think I have talked about this. So that was a fixed route service, and really, it's not just saying that people with special needs aren't going to be served anymore. There is that real paratransit service that we're proposing, and so that people who do those special needs are going to get better service. Paratransit service will take them directly from where they are to where they need to go, rather than on these regular bus routes that are deviating all over the place and having long travel times. So then I started to talk about trade-offs, and there are some trade-offs. This isn't the type of thing where you can everything just gets bigger, better. There are things we have to prioritize things, and so as we've done that, we've looked at what trade-offs are we trying to make, and so some of the important things are simpler, more predictable flex route service or fixed route service, more understandable service that people can understand, and better service to underserved general public markets, expanded commuter service that we've heard a lot of, and better evening and weekend service, and that really applies more to the urban services down in Burlington. But those are some of the things we've prioritized. And how do you pay for all that? Our scenario 1 looks at increasing cost by 20%, but that's a lot, but it's still not enough to do everything. So some of the trade-offs that are included in the scenarios are discontinuation of service in very low demand areas. Some of those are those deviations where the route goes, a couple blocks this way to pick up one person. There's one, to stay out of specifics in this area, I can say there's a big, huge, long loop down in Williston that operates a couple times a day, carries 4 people all day, and that degrades service from the rest of the route. So those types of trade-offs, looking at if we don't do those things, we have more money to spend on places where the demand is a lot higher and we can provide service to more people. And the other thing that's in here is little geographical expansion to areas with low demand. And as I mentioned, one thing that we have heard that's very important to a lot of people is to have service to as many places as possible, even where demand is very low. And so we have heard that, but again, we can't do everything, and that's one of the things that we didn't prioritize. So there's some geographical expansion in our scenarios, but not a whole lot. So then, let me stop there before we get into the scenarios, and I think, we have a small group and we can, does that make sense to people? Do you have questions? Would you like to make comments at this point?
I have a question about the paratransit and how will the scenarios, will you go as far as planning a paratransit route depending on what scenario? I guess my question is, if the recommendation is to move forward with more dedicated paratransit, will a plan be put in place, or is that for someone else to do?
We will put together much of the plan. I mean, typically the way paratransit is provided for the all-day routes, which really here is the Route 110, it's anyone who lives within 3/4 of a mile of that route can get service for the same hours that the main route operates. That's kind of the minimum you have to provide by law if you provide complimentary paratransit. And so you can have a larger zone than that. So those are discussions that we would still need to have. So we know what the minimums are, but then in terms of do you go beyond that? In an area like this, where that's a pretty significant part of demand, there are often good reasons to. So we will, I think at the end of the day, we will have defined those general parameters in terms of what the zone looks like. The hours, I think, it's usually pretty clear that the hours that service operates is the same as the fixed route of the 110. But I think it's very likely it could be a larger area. Okay. So then to move on to the scenarios, we have 3 scenarios. We looked at major expansion, which is a 20% increase in operating costs. And what that is looking at, I'll talk about changes by each route, but I think that the biggest part of that is, I think this is additional. I'm not sure why that one is called out because there's more to it than that. I think ignore this right here for now. It's looking at expanded service on many of the routes that are operating here now, and we will go through that. The moderate expansion is also an expansion, but trying to accomplish the major features of scenario 1 with smaller increases in operating costs. And then scenario 3 is cost neutral, still trying to achieve some of the benefits of scenarios 1 and 2, but without an increase in operating costs, and that of course forces more of those trade-offs that I was just talking about. Things that are in all 3 of the scenarios are really the simplified route alignments and consistent schedules, and as I was talking about, those things are really important to expand the appeal of transit to more of the general public. Expanded service, and we'll talk about that route by route, but that really means more service than there is now on existing routes. Streamlined local service in St. Albans, we've got some maps of that. The Route 110 is very, very circuitous, operates to people where there's no riders, so trying to make that straighter and focus on where people are actually riding to and from. More direct service to and from Alberg. And time connections to and from the St. Albans Industrial Park, connections there between really the Alfred route and the St. Albans link to make it easier to get people to get to and from Burlington. So I'll start with this and start with the easiest one probably. Do a route by route. The 109 is a weekly shopping shuttle that has one round trip on Tuesdays that gets people to from down in the downtown area up into, from Swanton to shopping down here. that route does very well, but it doesn't do so well that it looks like it needs to be expanded. So that's one route. In all three of the scenarios, we're proposing that continue to operate as it does today.
And expanded means the number of times you make the loop?
In this one, it would, in this route, for this route, it would continue to operate, so there wouldn't be any changes in any of the scenarios. And that's really consistent with what Green Mountain Transit is operating with these shopping shuttles in a lot of areas. Most of them runs a week. A few of them, I think one of them runs up to 3 times a week. But the once a week is really kind of the standard for that, and so we're not looking at making major changes to the shopping shuttles anywhere. They're doing very well, but it's very efficient to concentrate those trips into 1 day a week as they are now. And so the biggest changes here are for the Route 110 St. Albans downtown shuttle, and it's coming from, not quite tall enough, but from the shopping areas up here, from Highgate Commons, Walmart, and Price Chopper, and getting people down here, and then I don't know. It's probably hard to see here with this color scheme and this smaller monitor, but it's coming down here, making a big loop through. It makes a loop through downtown here, makes another loop here, and makes another loop down to the industrial park. So it's making like 3 888s down in downtown and south of downtown down to the industrial park. We've got some green dots on here that indicate ridership. And Food City here has a lot of ridership. These stops in downtown, the Rite Aid, and in this area right here in downtown is getting ridership. Over here, Weldon Villa has 1 rider. We've got 1 rider at South Elm Street and Lower Weldon Street.
Is there a way to blow that up, Jeff, so we can see it?
Trying.
We'll set the tape out.
You may be able to, David, if you take it out of, okay. All right, yeah. Excellent, okay. So, and then when you see down here where these triple double loops are, there is 1 rider at Community College of Vermont, and then a bunch of riders down at the St. Albans Industrial Park. So the size of the green dot represents relative ridership. So you can see that there's a lot of that route, the route's traveling around in circles in the downtown area and south of downtown, to places where nobody's riding the bus. So that's the major issue with the route. So we've tried to, if you can go back to the, so if we go to the next slide, we really wanted to do something about this big loop through here, but Food City's over here. We've got some riders here and here, so that stayed. And the top end of the route stays the same, except for Rite Aid, where the bus is going right into the parking lot at Rite Aid, whereas we would keep it on Main Street. And then you can see most of the changes are south of Weldon Street. Keep it on Main Street, take everything into the industrial park, so that these extra loops here that aren't being used would be discontinued. So up here in downtown, it's still going around in 1 circle, but still a lot less than it is now. So more direct service than there is today.
So what? Can we clarify what's getting eliminated by doing that? So you're missing London Drive.
Yeah, can you go back to the...
There's a
Yes. And I'll zoom in. Four Winds.
So Four Winds has a dotted line. The route isn't scheduled to go there. That's one of the request stops. So that would be served by paratransit instead of Route 110.
And then Lemna,
And then,
which is just west of CCV.
London was actually where your finger was.
That funny dog.
That's London, that stretch there. So
Yeah.
that's the one that goes by the CVOEO office and the food bank.
And there's no ridership on that? There's little ridership?
no. Or, there could be less than 1 a day, which it wouldn't show up. But if there's 1 rider every day, it would get a little dot like Community College of Vermont over here. So that's in terms of when we talk about streamlining things, is a lot of these routes have been aligned to take people to a lot of places, but then the actual operation of the route has shown that there aren't people using the route to go there.
So what we know though is that people aren't getting on there. We don't know if people are getting off there.
True.
Well, so the only reason for them not to show up is if they got off there and then didn't get back on to go home. You know, if they got a ride home or something. So, for the most part, with few exceptions, people usually get back on where they get off or across the street, but no, it's not the case here because it's a loop.
What's the timing now of this loop today? It's every summer. Is it really every hour? On the hour?
Wow. So hard to believe. I mean, you have Vermont Adult Learning there, CVOEO, backdoor to CCB, just across the
Backdoor
lot.
CCD and
mobile home.
there's
Mobile park right there too, kind of.
Oh, that's right.
there's an early ed. Isn't there early ed support there?
And there's a childcare facility there.
Well, there's a childcare, but also it's part of the CGOEL office. There's the
That's oh, yeah, that's right.
Head Start shares that.
And
office too.
Steven, you're collecting the boarding information every day on these routes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, we do some of the Burlington routes, we don't have everyday data, but this is data that's collected every day on these routes. I think a couple of the, so I think I pointed out service would stay on Main Street instead of going into the parking lot of Rite Aid. Other changes would be to, or they're on some others, the next slide, so maybe you can. Yeah, I mean, this is what, you know, the ridership counts are showing, and it is day in and day out. This isn't just one day that might have been unusual.
It'd be interesting to look at that on a day of the month average, because, for example, the food shelf in CVOEO tends to go in peaks. They tend to get a lot more business at the end of the month as money's running out. So it'd be interesting to see if there's as opposed to just looking at a daily average number, it'd be interesting to see how that changes over time.
Yeah, and I guess
And summer versus winter.
And I guess another thing to point out when we look at these alignment changes, what we use as an acceptable walking distance is 5 minutes, which translates into about a quarter of a mile. And so, and that's something that's it holds pretty true throughout the transit industry. In places where the walking environment is good, it can be longer. In places where the walking environment is terrible, like some of the commuter routes, it can be much, much shorter. But so in downtown St. Albans, which is a place that has a good walking environment, you know, we look at that 5 minutes as reasonable. So a lot of these changes here, when we do have the bus going up and down Main Street, that, you know, these other locations are then within what we consider an acceptable walking distance. And in terms of making service attractive to more people, that having the bus be straighter and thus faster, and having people walk to the bus is a better way to do it than having the bus wind around to the front door of a lot of places. Yeah. Yes.
What happens if you have Sunday service? What about have the earlier time on Saturday to connect with supposed to with 96 go down to Burlington? People, now first may not take on the idea first, but then you see that they may go on and go down. Mm-hmm. And people who live in other counties who moved here may see that as a valuable interest to move here, so they go back and forth.
So we do, so the 96 is serving downtown St. Albans. So we're not, isn't really designed to connect people to the 96 because the 96 is serving much of the same area. Some of the changes we are looking at is to provide better connections, and we'll get to these better connections to the Alberg and the Richford routes to provide those connections. Catherine?
I'm just going to suggest we back up a couple minutes to the discussion we kind of moved away from about the CVOEO stuff because our director just walked in the room. This is our CVOEO director. So if you could just back up and review what we were just talking about, I think that would be great. Sorry to derail everybody, but
Yeah, if you can just, David, if you can blow up on this part of the route.
The existing.
This is the existing 110 route. And so south of downtown, it's making 2 different loops. And this one is full-time down to the St. Albans Industrial Park is some trips go there, many trips don't go there. So that's another one of the inconsistent things that we like to take to eliminate. The green dots here show ridership. Ridership by stop. The bigger the dot is, the higher the ridership. The smaller the dot, we get down to 1 rider. So you see there's 1 rider at Community College of Vermont. But a lot of the places over here in these lower loops we're not showing any riders at all. And so what we're trying to do, and Dave, if you can go forward to the next one. So looking at south of downtown, just running service on South Main Street to and from the industrial park, eliminating these loops, and then people would walk from Main Street to get to the places that the loops are now going. So what we're trying to do is make service faster for people who are going to the locations on Main Street and not take them out of the way to places that...
But when you say shows no ridership at all on London Drive, how can that be true? I mean, people take the bus all the time. They're coming into our office, which is Community Action, and as well as the Vermont Adult Learning.
I guess we're
State's Attorney and Nessie and a lot of state services in there.
Yeah, so they're Green Mountain Transit, we're using the data that the drivers collect where anybody gets on a bus, they record people getting on. So we don't have people getting off, but usually people who get off at one location also get back on at the same location. So what their numbers are showing is an average of less than 1 rider a day. Yeah. So if it's 1 rider a day above, it's a green. So that's not saying there's never any riders, but it's averaging less than 1 a day. And so we're saying if the average is that low, then we should have people walking to and from Main Street. And I'm not sure where I was when you walked in, but one of the things that's important for transit is that most people want to spend less time on the bus and not more time on the bus. So it's really important to make things as fast as possible. And one of the ways to really slow down a bus is to have it doing a lot of the loops that it is and going out of its way. And in terms of broadening appeal to more people, it's much better to have people walk to a straight and direct route than to take the bus to the front door of a lot of locations. So that's the trade-off here, is that, and I think did you hear me talking about, I think you were here when I was talking about the walking distances. Mm-hmm. So it's, so those locations are within a 5-minute walk, so we say that.
But yeah, for a healthy person.
And so the part you didn't get is that one of the issues with service, Green Mountain Transit service in rural areas, including here, is that it tries to do too much of everything. It's trying to be, the fixed routes are trying to serve the general public, they're trying to provide paratransit, they're trying to serve other locations. And so because they're trying to serve all these multiple markets with one route or a single route, it doesn't do a very good job of it. So the proposal here is to have the fixed routes serve the general public and the people who can walk to and from a route. And then for the people who can't walk to or from a route is to start real paratransit, which is the typical approach in almost all the country. So that if you really can't walk to a bus route, you would be eligible for paratransit, and the bus, or a vehicle, not a bus, but a vehicle, a van usually will come directly to in front of your house or wherever you are and take you directly to where you're going directly. So that's proven to be almost everywhere a better approach than trying to split things too many ways with a single service.
Jeff, and what's the eligibility for paratransit? Medicaid?
Well, you want to talk about
I was going to point out, my name's David, I'm the planning manager at GMT. I want to point out too that these aren't set in stone by any means. I think we need to look at our ridership data again at LEMNA from what we're hearing, and reevaluate this recommendation. Also, if we hear from folks like yourself and the public that that's unacceptable, then certainly we're not going to implement a route change that the public and the town officials, disagree with. So again, this isn't set in stone. These are just service recommendations from best transit practice and from our third-party consultant. So we do need to look at the ridership again.
Clearly, if it's one person in a pace, I wouldn't argue with that, but I find that hard to believe. And I'm wondering if we couldn't work with you as an agency to try to really establish what the ridership is. If we had some way of working with you, even taking a poll of our clients or something like that. And again, if it's that low, clearly, I don't want GMT or the town, other riders to suffer for that. But it's my opinion that just anecdotally, that it's much higher.
Jeff, I'd be interested in definitely doing that. Getting with the organization and working together to get the true number, because I was just saying they may be getting on somewhere else, but they need to be there, right? So because they're not getting on there, should we just count that in general? I understand the formula and the algorithms and all the things that you're using, but there's still a little bit more of a something we should organize the service.
As well as Vermont adult learning, I've got to believe there's got to be young adults getting
A lot of this, too, maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but in my experience, the perception is a lot higher than the reality. And I'm not discounting anyone's, ideas or opinions personally. We do encounter a lot of perception that there's such a need, but then when we go and poll the people that we can poll, it turns out that the need doesn't match perception. But for sure, we need to look at this.
That might be true. I'm not challenging that at all.
No.
But
I think we're all saying.
And if there are people riding to or from a place who really want to serve it, which is why you see we're trying to streamline things, but the bus is still going this way and this way because there is demonstrated ridership there. So if there's something wrong with the numbers, and there really are, we want to serve those places, but we're working with the numbers that seem to be good, but we can look into those more.
One other suggestion, Jeff. It took me a while to sink into me anyway that explain what paratransit really is. It's wherever we have a route. The federal regulation is you have to, if there's someone that needs extra assistance to be able to ride the bus, on demand they can have you drive, I forget, up to a quarter mile, half mile, three-quarters of a mile to pick them up or drop them off if they schedule ahead of time and all this stuff. The option is either you do that with the existing route or you set up a separate paratransit system to deal with those specific requests. And right now, today in St. Albans, we don't have that separate system, and so our schedules get all screwed up every time you have to do this deviation. If you have to do multiple deviations in one run, you're now off a schedule, and it makes it very hard to know when's the bus coming, when you're going to get where you need to get. And that's why it's part of this discussion on simplification as to why we add the paratransit to make the simplification take place.
I'll dovetail off of that, Bob. So the downtown shuttle does operate hourly, as you asked, but 15 to 20 minutes of that is built-in deviation time to allow the bus to fulfill that FTA requirement, whereby if someone can't make it to a fixed route bus stop, they can schedule a ride. The bus goes to their house or doctor's office, wherever, within 3/4 of a mile of the fixed route, and brings them to where they need to go. Oftentimes, if the bus doesn't have a pickup during that specific hour, it'll just sit at Food City for 15-20 minutes, which is really a drag when you're riding. I've ridden the downtown shuttle enough to have spent some time at Food City, and you just want to. It's 10:40. I can't leave Food City till 11. So that speaks to streamlining and making the service simpler. The paratransit model, GMT currently does do a lot of medical trips in the region currently on top of the fixed route. We're not really talking about those trips and those services currently and with this presentation, but I think and I haven't, done the math specifically, but I think with those services, we could probably cover the majority of the folks that are riding the downtown shuttle bus via those deviations. If we made the St. Albans downtown stay on Main Street and the fixed route, as Jeff's pointed out, we could probably get those 10, 12 trips a day via those other services that we're already operating with no problem.
Yeah, Bob, I think that's good to bring that up. I kind of take it for granted everybody knows.
Yeah,
what
it took me a while to figure it out when you kept talking about it previously. It's like,
Right, and so by law, it's federal law that part of the American with Disabilities Act that you have to provide you have to provide service to people who can't get to or from a fixed route bus stop within 3/4 of a mile. And so this predates the formation of GMT, whereas small operators that couldn't afford to provide, what I'll call real paratransit service. So they just said, we got to serve these people. So we'll just have them call up we'll have the regular bus. If on the day someone calls, that bus will just go up to 3/4 of a mile out of their way and 3/4 of a mile back, and everybody else on the bus goes out there to pick them up. It's very rare to provide service like that. I mean, in Green Mountain Transit, there are always exceptions, but I think Green Mountain Transit is probably one of the last providers in the country to provide service that way. And so what we're proposing is to really transition to the model that's used almost everywhere else and works and has been proven to work better for almost all populations.
Which is to provide a specific transport then.
That's correct.
So a smaller vehicle,
Yeah.
all of those things.
Yeah, which is what Green Mountain Transit or what CCTA has always done down in the Burlington area. Now part of GMT also. But it's kind of this isn't the only place it's done in the Green Mountain Transit system. It's really the old legacy rural systems are all still doing it. We're proposing the same thing down from the Montpelier Bay area also.
And again, what's the eligibility criteria for the parents?
So typically it's there are federal requirements that are minimum, which is age, so 65 or above, and then if you have a disability that prevents you from being able to use fixed route bus service, either to be able to physically get to or from it, or to have another, say, a mental disability that you just can't understand how to use it. So it's really age and being a senior citizen or being any age with a disability that means you have difficulty.
It's like a cab service. You would call it up in a prearranged.
It's usually it's usually with a van because they have to be wheelchair equipped because a lot of the riders are in wheelchairs. So it's usually not a regular car. It's usually a wheelchair equipped van.
And there's typically a lead time, so typically you schedule a day out at a minimum.
And are those can those be for personal use or are they just medical trips?
No, they can be for any kind of trip. Yep, any kind of. There's no limitation on the type of trip.
And is the charge different from what it would be to take the bus?
Again, that's that. What do you? Federal law says you can't charge more than twice the adult cash fare. But I should have this in my head. What are you doing in Chittenden County? What's your?
That's
your double.
So it's $2.50.
Okay, so that's
$2.50 a trip.
Yeah.
That's not. I think we have some criteria with that too. We can't charge more than that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And just so you know, the application process is included with an actual interview as well as your doctor is involved in a section of the application. Mm-hmm. So the doctor kind of fills it out. It's all confidential. And then once you're certified and you qualify for the service, you qualify for 3 years, and then there's kind of a re-up type process. So once you're certified in the system, you can basically call a day ahead of time and you're already there. And it's
And has a decision been made to provide that paratransit, or is it something you talked about?
so what we're going over are 3 scenarios that we've come up with. One is that goes up from a 20% increase in cost down to cost neutral, but we're proposing that for all 3 scenarios.
I guess my question, sorry to keep us on paratransit, but
It's okay.
it seems important.
Yeah.
My understanding of paratransit is that the town provider also has to chip in some of the money, like the 20% match. Is there a concern with financing a plan, an expansion that St. Albans would have to also pay for?
Let me have David or Mark answer that in terms of, that's really GMT policy, and they're looking for local contributions for all their services, but
There's no specific added money to the program at all. What will happen, and I have seen happen, is it actually gets more efficient. And so you actually will look at it a different way. It's not necessarily will cost you more money, you'll just be able to be more efficient. As David said, without a rider on the bus, you sit for 15 to 20 minutes. That changes all that as well, so the service would increase. So in my experience, when you control that, as an organization, you can kind of control your cost as well. So there would be no, unless of course the board made that decision, but there would be no more funding necessarily part of a new paratransit service. Correct.
So the recommendation is to move some of the deviated riders onto paratransit, and the hope is that there's not going to be a cost increase, but and with increased riders, more efficient.
Yes.
What about if the individuals that who are riding the bus on the regular route aren't eligible for paratransit, then what?
then they would walk to...
They'll walk off Main Street through CCB over to AO, over to CBEO or back.
Yep.
There's a fence there. That's what they can do.
Oh, well, that's what I was going to ask you.
Seriously?
What type of, is that even possible? Is that possible for them to get over to Lemna Drive through CCB drop-off?
Yeah, sure. I know it would actually be a perfect way to do it. There's a fence there that needs to be dealt with, and a pathway to something like that. So I would imagine
The official walkway is actually down the street as opposed to through the backyard. But
Well,
then you're, I was trying to figure out if that's more than a quarter mile.
Or just the end of Lemna on Weldon.
Yeah, Weldon also. That's a longer walk, I think, than it is from
Is it?
Mason. Yeah, Mason.
Yeah, it's so tight. I mean, there could be a stop at the corner of Mason.
yeah, that's right, corner Mason, that's true.
Okay, should we go? Yeah, I think we've covered everything there. So the days and the hours of service. Existing service runs till 6:40 right now in the evening and until 3:30 on Saturdays. On an average day, there is nobody riding the last trip, the one that is leaving around 5:45. And so that, in all three scenarios, that would be discontinued. And in scenario one, Saturday service, which now ends at 3:45, would be extended to 5:45 to provide the same hours as on weekdays. Same thing in all three scenarios. So the Saturday service gets expanded. On weekdays, you see a little bit of a shift in times here, and that's to improve connections with the Alfred route specifically. And then on Sundays, there's no service. Scenario 2 does have service that would run the same hours as on the other days. And you probably heard me, if you're asking why scenario 1, which is a 20% increase in cost, how come that doesn't have the Saturday service or the Sunday service? We're trying to make everything fit, and we spent a lot of money on other improvements in scenario 1 that we'll get to in a minute. But in terms of the comments and feedback we'd like from you, it's like, don't tell us what you like. If you don't choose between scenario 1, 2, or 3, we'd like you to tell us what you like about the components of each different scenario, and then at the end we can mix and match things. So that's the hours of service. The next slide, David. Continuing 60-minute service. The route operates every 60 minutes. That would continue again in scenario 2. That adds in the Sunday service. I think that covers Route 110. So any last comments on Route 110, and we can certainly come back to it.
The other piece was the getting to the industrial park, getting that to be more consistent.
Yeah, all of the service would run down to the industrial park all day. Yep.
Right. Where now it's certain routes at certain times that nobody
that's
can keep
another
straight.
one of those confusing things where it's kind of we're looking at is the ridership. If the ridership is high enough to serve it some of the time, you should do it all of the time. If the ridership is is really low, and maybe you shouldn't be doing that at all. So that's the general rule. There are exceptions, like a school. You know, if a school has a ton of kids getting out at 3 o'clock, you don't need to serve it all day. But for the most part, it's kind of looking at that more consistent approach. All right. So Route 96, getting into the commuter routes. This is probably the biggest route in terms of ridership that's serving this area. And what we're looking at here are, well, the existing service has four trips in the morning and 4 trips in the afternoon, and those trips are doing well. So it's a good service. Scenario 1, looking at adding a 5th AM trip, and then in the afternoon adding 2 more trips. And the reason for adding 2 more trips in the afternoon is to have one that comes out of Burlington earlier that connects with the Alfred route, and also
Albert.
Albert, what did I say? Oh, Albert. Did I say Alfred? But Albert. And then Richburg and Alford, maybe that's what but Albert and Richford. So to make a connection with those 2 routes, so to allow, to provide the ability to get to and from Burlington from points further north. So that's adding more service on Route 96, and then in scenario 2, rather than adding as many trips, it's adding 1 trip in each direction. But in the morning and the afternoon, in the morning, one of those trips would come from Alberg, and one of them in the afternoon, one of them will go back to Alberg, and that would replace the existing route. So you would have a 1-seat ride between Alberg and Burlington. And then in scenario 3, it would continue the same level of service, but with some slight adjustments to the times to balance loads and better match work schedules in Burlington. So those are kind of some minor tweaks to the schedule rather than big changes.
Scenario 3, do we still have to be able to link with Alberg so you can go both ways, or did that go away?
In which scenario?
Scenario 3. I was thinking we still had that tied in better.
Yeah, so the schedule changes would to make those connections.
Those are in order. Today you can get from Alberg to Burlington, but you can't get from Burlington to Alberg.
Is that the way it works? Okay.
So all 3 of these fix that problem.
Okay. Yeah. And we.
Okay. What are those PM times to solve that leaving Burlington?
We haven't gotten to the point to figure out the exact schedule times at this point, so it's just we put that on our radar screen and said that's one of the things we want to accomplish. So the Alberg, Georgia commuter. Right now there's 1 trip in the morning and 1 trip in the afternoon, and those are mostly used by people who work at Peerless Clothing, going to and from. And that's a lot of the reason for just 1 trip now, because it's really the main market for that, and it's set up to serve the major work times there. But looking at going forward is to add 2 a.m. and 2 p.m. trips, and again with changes in times to also make it so that you can use that route to get to and from Burlington, which, Bob, as you said, doesn't really work now. Scenario 2, as we said, that gets replaced by Route 96, and then scenario 3 is really the same as scenario 1, adding an additional trip. So still 1 trip is focused on Peerless Clothing, and then the other trip is we would time it at times to be determined to help people get to and from Burlington better. The other thing there is that the Alberg route is now going down to Georgia. After it comes in and goes to Peerless Clothing, it's going down to Georgia and then coming back up to Bellows Free Academy. And so looking forward, I'm not sure when this starts, but Bellows Free Academy is going to start providing their own student transportation, which means that people who are now riding this route will shift over to the school bus. And so with that change, then the segment of the route south of Peerless Clothing would be discontinued.
They actually already did that this year.
Well, they did, no, it's okay, start already.
So that means that unless the Burlington link is extended to Albert, there's no way to get from Albert to Georgia.
Yeah, what we get tell from the ridership numbers, there's only, other than the students, there's only 2 people riding to Georgia. So that's again where the market is so small.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that everybody understood
Yeah,
that.
so
That means unless the commuter route is extended and that option is.
Does the commuter route stop at Georgia?
It does, it stops at the Georgia
At
Parking
the
Lot.
Georgia Park?
Yeah.
It goes actually
School.
to Arrowhead Industrial Park, which is south of the park and ride, and also on request, the Georgia Dairy Park, which is also, well, it's on the same road as the park and ride.
And you're saying
The
those are...
link doesn't stop at all those places.
Correct, the Albert, Georgia commuter.
Right, so
I'm sorry.
if the Albert Georgia is replaced with the link service, the link service currently stops just at the Georgia Park and Ride.
Yes.
So you would have to walk to the industrial park.
It's quite a distance.
It's distance, but it's.
And it's a bad road too. You said there were 2, it looked like 2 riders?
It's 2 riders other than students.
Is it included in one of these scenarios?
No, I mean, that just becomes a market that's just really too small to justify running buses to serve. You know, we're looking for, and we talked about the trade-offs and how, you know, some reductions in low ridership markets to be able to make these other improvements. So that just becomes, the market just gets so small that doesn't really justify public transit service.
Sure. So I'm understanding it goes to the Georgia commute, to the park and ride,
Yeah,
in all scenarios.
Only in scenario 2, where it's replaced with the 96, which is the Burlington link,
Yeah.
going from Albert through, that option would stop at the Georgia Park and Ride.
I guess this would be the Richburg route.
This is the one.
Okay, this is the one. All right, so again, this is also a route that's operating, also 1 a.m. and 1 p.m. trip, very similar to 115, but coming from Richford. And here, its scenario 1 is to bump it up to 2 trips, a.m. and p.m. And then the other 3 scenarios are to just continue to provide that 1 trip. And looking at why this differs from the Albert route is that the Albert route has significantly higher ridership than the Richford route does. So that's why I was kind of looking at as more emphasis on 115. So this doesn't get as many improvements except twice as much service on the in scenario 1.
But the that's it, ridership is down because of the timing of the one route.
And so is the timing of the existing trip a problem?
They're here all day.
Or are you saying the fact that there's only 1 trip?
Yeah, it demands a
Can they
really
get
long,
to Burlington and back?
day for it.
They can get to Burlington and back though, right, with the timings we set up on this one, or not?
I don't think they can either. No. Same,
But you can go
to Burlington, but not back.
Yeah.
So that's where if we, I guess with scenario 1 with Route 96 where we add another AM trip and the 2 PM trips, you can improve, and you have 2 trips going up to Richford, you can make those connections. So in scenario 1 you'd be able to. In scenario 2 and 3, it still doesn't work, and the reason you can't make it work with 1 trip is, you know, this trip is designed to get people out of work when they're leaving work at Peerless Clothing, and so by the time that trip leaves, you would have to leave Burlington much earlier than before you're done work, really. So by the time you get out of work in Burlington and come up, this trip is already gone because it's really leaving St. Albans around the same time the links where you need to leave Burlington. So that's the issue there. You can't make the connections without adding extra trips.
scenario 2 extra trips would allow the individual to go on to Burlington and back. Is that what you mean?
Scenario one.
Yes, scenario 1.
Scenario 1, yes,
right.
yeah, the first one.
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
And then this really only scenario 1 with the Alberg service, it's scenario, really all 3 scenarios would allow you to make connection, or to get to and from Burlington, scenario 2 on a 1-seat ride, scenarios 1 and 3 connection. And this map also reminds me, one thing I forget to mention about 115 is right now that route will detour on request to Highgate, and it's a 4-mile detour, and right now there's another one, less than 1 person a day wants to go there, and so some days the route just goes straight to Alberg. Other routes it's doing a 4-mile detour through Highgate, so it's taking everybody on the bus 4 miles out of their way for 1 person. So that's again the trade-offs where it's better to provide good service to a lot of people than to provide bad service to a lot of people for the benefit of 1 person. So in all 3 scenarios, we're proposing just take it up 89, up and then up through Swan. I did want to just mention that.
Can I ask so is it within GMT's purview to think of like the first mile, last mile? Like if we're thinking about, it's not a bus that's going to serve Richford to the extent that we think it may be necessary for economic development or connection to human services? Like,
it's certainly, yeah. I
is
mean, you raise
mini mass transit? Like, what are the?
You raise a really good point. This study is focused more on short-term changes to existing services, but there are lots and lots of different ways to provide transit, and GMT is really just one part of the puzzle. And GMT is a big part of the puzzle, but it's one part. And what other places have done, there were partnerships with like Uber and Lyft are becoming more common, which is something that could work down in Burlington. Uber and Lyft probably isn't here. I know it isn't where I live, but they may come, but down in Burlington, other entities provide a lot of service. CATMA provides a ton of service down in Burlington. University of Vermont and Johnson State College provide a ton of service. So, they've determined what their own needs are, and they're providing that. Lots and lots of social service agencies provide their own service, less here in Vermont than other places, but the United Way actually runs the transit system in Concord, New Hampshire. So it is one piece of the puzzle, and those first mile, last mile connections are there's transportation management agencies, which are CAPMA, which are organizations that get together to provide service. Many times those services connect to a public transit system. So that kind of goes beyond where we are, but GMT and CCTA did what were called transit development plans that really just focused on my advertisement for YouTube, looked at how to expand existing fixed route services, but something like a TDP, which I believe Green Mountain Transit will do in the future, really can look beyond its own services and how to partner with other agencies to really expand the universe of transit service and to make those first mile, last mile connections, to partner with Uber and Lyft, to partner with TMAs and other organizations that provide services that complement their own services.
Yeah, and I guess that's my question, because we've come into the regional partners. And what I have said, I know you guys are doing everything you can, there's some great changes here, all of that. I'm more interested in where the holes are. Mm-hmm. And who takes that on, Catherine, as a project for a region, as to, okay, so this is all worked out, we fix that, now these are the holes. We still know that we have kids up in Richford trying to get down here for work and over to CCB and doing that. And then that large majority of them that are coming down, we talked in one of our regional meetings about whether or not some of those services could be provided on one individual day a week, so that we knew that on Tuesdays of the week, the bus was critical to come down from Richford through Enosburg all the way down through, because at the state office building, that was the Richford Enosburg day for those service providers. But I'm not sure how that, once this is determined as a region, where that type of conversation goes. I don't know, Catherine's the...
I don't know either.
Okay.
Because there's no one answer.
Okay.
I think it's going to take a variety of individuals and organizations coming together and figuring those pieces out. GFT can't do it alone, the hospital can't do it alone, regional planning can't do it alone. It's going to need legislative buy-in too, because there needs to be some better way of coordinating Medicare transportation and the other things that all of the drivers that are taking people places come with rules and regulations, and anything we can do to streamline those and make them fit together better is going to require everybody participating.
But as part of this study, I think those are comments that need to get fed back into our process through the blog or
Oh, yeah,
Dave's quick notes, so that,
And this helps better define where those holes are.
That's right.
And whether it makes sense to serve those holes with general public transit. And what we're finding is, in most cases, it's not.
It's not.
And so that at least gives a roadmap for where we need to fix the kind of, holes that we need to fix in a different way.
Yeah, and I think community partners would be like excited to be at the table for those moments of seeing a compromise and be willing to, we want the best, kind of overall system, and knowing that community partners can come in to really try to plug those the gaps, and that the individuals that we know need to be connected to services.
The good thing about this is that these discussions are here in Vermont. These discussions are national right now. I mean, there's conferences now that are just first mile, last mile, first mile, just for the whole conference. Is talking about different partners that can have taxi cabs, local churches, volunteer drivers, all of these groups trying to get together to come up with some type of a scenario where this would work. And there's software companies now that's all they're doing is trying to build software that you can actually do that you can actually hit a button and say, well, I'm here, how do I get here? Well, maybe there's a volunteer driver coming through. So there's a lot of industry information out there, and we just keep, it's like we just keep pulling it down and looking at it. But it's going to take, as Catherine said, it's really a group of everybody getting together and having these conversations.
We're talking about first mile, last mile, we're talking about how you get to the bus stop.
Yeah.
Sorry, fancy term.
I mean, autonomous vehicles are great, but they're not quite ready yet.
There's a transit service, I think, somewhere in the Midwest, I can't remember where, that started their own mini taxi service to pay, so people could call and get a taxi ride to their transit bus. So there's lots of different models, and there's no one right solution.
Okay, so our next steps, just to wrap this up and then we can keep talking, but it's really getting stakeholder input. There's this series of meetings. Beginning of the year, we'll be coming out with draft recommendations and then have another series of recommendations or another of meetings like this. It's the additional technical analysis, the ridership estimates. We've already developed operating cost estimates, some other technical work that we need to do. And then finally, there was recommendations in January based on what we hear from all of you, what we hear from through our website and the other stakeholder input that we've been getting, the results of that technical analysis, and then putting that together with GMT's financial capacity so that we can come up with recommendations that they can actually implement. So that's, this is the draft recommendations in January. I think we're now targeting probably February for that second round of
Yeah, we're going to
meetings.
talk tomorrow a little bit more about that, so
Okay.
it might be pushed up just a little bit more if we want to do some more public outreach.
So what are you talking about for implementation?
Well, implementation will be a process. It could take up to, some of the low-hanging fruit could happen fairly quick. With the recommendations, some may take a little bit longer because of the funding sources, et cetera. So I don't really have like a time frame. Like I said, in some of the urban area, going from 15-minute headways to 20-minute headways are probably fairly simple to make those changes without too much of a disruption, but some of the longer service changes might take a little bit longer. So possibly a year from the time the recommendations come out.
Yes, any more comments that you have, if you have specific questions on the routes, we've got, I think everybody got it. We've got a document that provides a lot more detail on the changes by route, and if you haven't gotten one of those, please take one. And It's also available on a PDF version. If some of those maps are small, you can blow them up so you can actually see them.
And I should point out too that the website, and there's some cards here, the website has a live blog feature that you can, go home tonight, sleep on it and say, wow, why didn't I ask this? Go to the blog, type in your comment or question, and I try to check it every day and respond either privately if it is more appropriate or on the blog. And there's all of this presentation. I don't think the PowerPoints are on the website, but certainly as Jeff mentioned, the scenarios that you've got in paper form are on the website. You can look at Chittenden County recommendations, Washington, Lamoille County recommendations as well.
The question I would have is, so my understanding of the timeline is that you'll do recommendations in January, and then it sounds like additional public hearings in February?
The recommendations may not come out in January because what I think we're going to have an advisory committee tomorrow morning. We're probably going to have a conversation about maybe having even more public hearings like this.
Yeah.
And it also involving some of the municipalities that are involved and their possible planning staff and their staff. So we get some input from them. So it may get pushed back, that recommendation may get pushed back a month or maybe a little longer, but we'll discuss with the advisory committee tomorrow.
Yeah,
that's another way I put it is the recommendations coming out of the state probably won't be the final set of things that will really get implemented anyway. I think the board will have a lot more discussion of which bits and pieces do we really want to take all the way and what priority we put them in will be very different. So I'm not expecting you to tell us exactly what we're going to do when, and I'm talking to Jeff. I don't think their plan's going to tell us exactly. These are the ones you have to go do. There's still a lot of variability after this study.
My only, not concern, but my only comment would be is that gives us the time frame as a region of when we might want to look at what is going to be adopted, no matter how long it takes, so that we can start that planning, that conversation as some sort of a transportation forum with the partners on, okay, now we know where the holes are. What are our options?
I would also add that GMT has a policy that outlines when we have to talk to the public. So if the board adopts this plan, assuming they do, if or when the board adopts this plan and hypothetically says, let's change the Alberg and the link to XYZ, we would then have to have further public hearings in the region and involve the public in those decisions. And then go back to the board and say, hey, here's the public input we received in regard to this specific change. Do you agree? Is it amenable to the board? And then it could or could not be implemented depending on input. So we're certainly a long way away from making any changes. Typically, expansion, adding Richford trips would not require public input because we're expanding service. Depends on the route. Sometimes we do hold hearings with expansions so that we're sure that people are somewhat aware of what we're doing. Typically contractions or fare increases are when we really push.
Timing changes.
Sometimes.
I guess just to finish on my comment, what I was excited about is an opportunity for additional public conversation and a willingness. I think we're all representing agencies and that are connected to community members here, and kind of maybe asking for us to kind of go back to our constituents and our communities to put the word out for the next opportunity, so you can hear from true riders, individuals dependent on these very specific routes that, if it's Fearless Clothes or whatever, but I think this is a group that could be an additional lever into the community.
No, the more you could do that, the better. And, I know that the GMT folks have been having a lot of individual meetings, but, we also have our website where, most people are comfortable with websites nowadays. Not everyone is, but, where people are, it's much more efficient for us to get it that way. But I know that the GMT folks have been doing a lot of other individual meetings, and, I'm sure they're willing to continue to do that, but, you know, for us, the more input we get, the better, so, you know, beat the bushes, and that's, we would like that.
Yeah.
So what are your reactions overall? There's been a lot of comments about individual routes, overall reactions.
I'm glad this is your profession and not
Agreed.
When you do this, you really have to make a lot of trade-offs, which is why we have that slide up there. And the trade-offs are not easy, but you can't do it without making the trade-offs. And I know Catherine and Bob have heard me talk a lot about trade-offs already. And I'm not sure there was like that, but you know, it really is necessary, and you know, that's how to move things forward.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
How long has the existing routes been running? When was the last time you did this, I guess so?
We've never done this size analysis. So before you got here, Robert, I talked about we've never done a service analysis encompassing our entire Washington, Lemoyle, FGI, and Chittenden counties. CCTA was established in '73. That's Chittenden County. Yeah. 0203, the state gave us Washington and Lemoyle counties, and I think it was 07 that the state GMTA took over in Franklin and Grand Isle counties, and we've never done an analysis of this magnitude since taking over. Shouldn't say taking over.
Well, really, since
operating.
from the beginning, right? So, yeah.
All right, well, if you have any individual comments, we're here to take those also. So thank you all for coming, and some good comments and questions, and thanks again.